All right. It's looking better. All right. So what we have to finish up kind of in this introductory part, and we'll get into, as we get into some other developmental phases, other theories, like there's a Montessori theory, there's a few other theories that are best more described when we're actually getting into different developmental areas because they tend to be pretty specific to what to certain age groups and the like. Um, so let's get into Eric Erickson because there's a couple aspects of his theory that are important. Okay, now he is known what is a neo-Freudian. However, most of the neo-Freudians didn't really accept the kind of sexual and aggressive drives that Freud talked about. But what Erickson did agree with is that at certain age groups, we have some type of conflict or crisis that we need to overcome, kind of like what Freud talked about with, for example, the oral phase. Okay. And whether someone can overcome the need for oral gratification or not. But for him, he created a socio-emotional model, meaning that what he was interested in is how children develop emotionally and socially over time through the interaction with caregivers, family members, authorities, peers, and how those relationships shape the individual over time. The other part of Erickson's model is that it's a lifespan model. It's the first one that goes from basically infancy to death. Okay. And so he's going to introduce the idea that we still develop well into young adulthood, middle adulthood, and late adulthood. Okay. Um, Erickson originally said you kind of had a conflict that you have to get through at each stage. So if you look at this slide, it says, trust versus mistrust and not autonomy versus shame. And these are kind of the conflicts that during these age group a person goes through. Erickson's original model, he said, either you come out of this phase with trust or mistrust. Okay. And so that's how this model is going to be presented. What I would encourage you to do is think of these two dynamics on a continuum, that we all lay somewhere between trust and mistrust. Why? Because we don't live in a perfect world. Some of us may have had very well attending parents, but at times they weren't well attending. I know with my son, for example, when he was in the early infancy stage and early childhood stage, I tried to develop these ideas of trust and autonomy with him, but I also know that there were times that I was a human being and was not the best father in the world. And so I know my son, I hope he's more on the trust end, but he's somewhere probably between trust and I'm hoping the midline between the two. I hope. And so that's how I would encourage you to kind of think about these different things, even though I'm presenting them in their most extreme. Okay. All right. So let's get through this, and then we will see where we go next. Okay. So the first stage of Erickson's model is in infancy, from 0 to about 1.5, 2 years old. And in this phase, he argued that this is the ultimate period to develop trust or to understand what trust is. And so, and the reason being is between about the 0 to 1.5 years old, the infant is completely dependent on a caregiver. They're dependent on them for food, nourishment, warmth, all of the things they can't just pick up a fork and cook dinner, right? And so, because they're completely dependent on others, Erickson argued that this is a perfect time for the infant to learn, quote unquote, how people respond to them and how to interact with them. Okay. And how do they do this? So, in stages one, two, and well into three, I'm going to talk a lot about the the child caregiver dance. Okay. I'm going to use moms because I like moms and child. Let's maybe call the child Billy. I don't know. So in the infancy stage, if we're talking about complete trust, it looks something like this. Billy cries, mom shows up, changes Billy's diaper, puts him back. And after that change of diaper, and if you've ever had an infant, I hope you've experienced this. Usually, after the diaper change, there's this interaction between mom and Billy where Billy smiles, mom smiles back. You have that eye contact, and they're like, okay, we're good. And so put Billy back down, and then Billy cries. Mom comes, feeds Billy. They do that dance again. Puts him back down. Later on, Billy cries, needs warmth, needs held. And they keep having this interaction, this consistent interaction between I have a need, mom shows up, satisfies that need, and then we have that moment of kind of gratitude, that reciprocation of that kind of thank you, mom, and I love you kind of thing. They and I'm putting that in verbal terms, but kind of get the idea. So what's little Billy learning? He's learning that if he has a need, there's people in his world that will come, and as long as he reciprocates that through some emotional bonding moment, that will occur again. So he's going to develop trust. Okay. On the other extreme end, there's mistrust, and I'm going to give the extreme version. And what I need to encourage you to do is because you got to remember 0 to 1.5 years of age, we don't have language, but well, we don't have language as we say it is, like spoken words. We have the language of emotions, and we know infants are very sensitive to emotional states. So instead of listening to the words, I want you to listen to the emotion and tone. Okay. So in the total mistrust end, we have baby cries, no one shows up. Baby cries, no one shows up. Billy cries, no one shows up. Billy cries, no one shows up. Billy cries, mom comes in. Billy, what do you need now? I'm trying to watch my show. I'm trying to get other things done, and you're constantly making noise. What could you possibly need? Okay. So I want you to think about on an emotional level, what is Billy learning? Billy's learning one, if I have a need, there's no guarantee anyone's going to show up. Two, if they do show up, it's going to be an inconvenience for them. It's going to be an issue for them. It's going to make me feel bad. It's going to make me feel sad. And there's not going to be that moment of reciprocation because that moment has already been broken by the caregiver. So there's not going to be that after she feeds me, we're going to have a moment. There's after she feeds me, she's going to lay me down and forget about me again. What is Billy learning now? He's learning mistrust, that he can't rely on others, that he shouldn't, and that maybe when people need his help, that should be his emotional response to them. Okay. So this is kind of the thing. And again, I hope we're all somewhere on that continuum. And I hope that we're all more on the trust side. But this is what this sets up. So what does this set up for the infant? Well, on the trust end, it will be a continuation of developing the skill of someone needs a need, I can go do that, and they'll reciprocate from me. If I need something, someone will show up and I can reciprocate to them. On the mistrust end, this is where, again, we're going to look at this, especially in stages one, two, and three, especially where the infant does one of two behavioral patterns. One, the infant just becomes very despondent, doesn't give a rat's whatever that anyone is there, doesn't care if mom, dad walk in the room. They're just going to do what they do. Okay. On the other end, the child might become over attached. So this might be the infant that mom can't leave the room, even though mom set up the condition that mistrust occurred in. Okay. So these are the kind of two conditions that are set up. Now, I do want to mention later on when we get into infancy, the relationship is a little bit more complicated in that infants are born with a certain temperament and adults come in with a certain temperament, and sometimes those don't jive together. And so we'll see the complexity of this as we move along in the course, and then we'll also talk trust versus mistrust. Erickson's version of this is going to turn into what's known as attachment theory and attachment to early caregivers and kind of different ways in this continuum that a person can either become anxiously attached or securely attached. And we'll talk about those when we get through the infancy stage. So much more to this story, but I would encourage you to kind of see where are you on that continuum? Okay. All right. So if nothing changes in the child's environment or situation, this trust is going to set the child up for what's known as autonomy in the next stage. And again, if nothing changes in the infant's environment, it sets up for shame and doubt. Okay. Um, so let's talk about autonomy. What does healthy autonomy look like between 1.5 to about 3 years ago? Well, let's look at what these kiddos are doing at this phase. If you've ever been, especially you've heard probably the terrible twos, those kinds of things. But what are those terrible 2 years olds actually just really doing? They're exploring and figuring out what their world is about. They're getting into everything. This is where we put the ties on the counters and we put all the safety stuff up because these little guys want to know what everything is about. Okay. And they're very, very curious. And in healthy autonomy, uh, what again, we'll go back to the mother, infant, or child in this case, dance. What does healthy autonomy look like? Well, little Billy will go maybe play in his room 10, 15 minutes, and then he will purposely go to the kitchen and go, "Hey, mom, just checking in, looking good, everything's fine." And then we'll go back and play for another 10, 15 minutes. And then we'll go back and say, "Hey, mom, just remind you I'm here. Almost lunchtime. What are we thinking?" And he'll continue to do this back and forth play between checking in with what we call his secure base. And if we put it in attachment terms, that person that is there to keep him safe and comfortable and all those things, and practicing autonomy and going out and exploring the world, but knowing because he's maintaining this relationship with that secure base that if he gets in trouble, that secure base will show up and will help him, little Billy, out. Okay. And that's healthy autonomy, where the child will go freely explore, will go figure out the world. Of course, the parent's job is to make sure they do that safely, but the child will also come back and try and maintain that relationship and continue that relationship, right? And isn't that what we're taught as adults, right? They say one of the number one health things you could do for yourself if you're struggling, having difficulties, is randomly text someone. Tell someone they're having a good day. Go in your email and just email someone. Why? Because we're doing that check-in that we kind of hopefully learned in early childhood, that that's the way we maintain security and autonomy. Okay. So that's on that end of the continuum. On the other end of the continuum is, again, we have a child that probably is being raised in a chaotic environment that is have very probably despondent parents or very controlling parents, and those kinds of things. And what is this child going to learn in this phase of life? Well, first, it's going to continue to be that kind of dual outcome for this child. Either they're going to be that child who cannot let go of mom's leg because they have no idea what's going to happen if they let go of that leg. They don't know if that mother is going to come back. They don't know if that mother is going to be mad at them. They don't know that because that parent or that caregiver, or what should be that secure base, is so unpredictable. Okay. And what, and in addition to that, what the child is developing is this notion of shame and doubt. Okay. Shame is the notion that the child constantly um, feels that anything they do is wrong, that they're not sure if they're behaving correctly or incorrectly. That's shame. And it's shame because they feel bad for themselves, that they're self-blaming, okay? And they have doubt. They're not sure if what they're doing is right or wrong, and so they're apprehensive about doing things. Or this can be the child in the child care who has doubts about what they're supposed to do. So they're the child that in the child care goes and just takes a toy from another child and goes and takes it away. And even if it's not their time to play with it, and say, no, this is mine, because they have a doubt in their mind from this chaotic environment they come from, whether or not they'll be able to play with that toy eventually or not. So since it's right there and there, I'm going to take it, and that child will just have to deal with it. Okay. That's shame and doubt. And that arises again from that continued mistrusting relationship between the caregiver and the child and the inconsistent environment. On the other end, I mentioned the child that is tightly bound to mom's leg. Because in this shame and doubt, if you can imagine the child, the toy taker in the classroom, this is also the child who you have a family party and you're 3 or 4 hours into it, and everyone asks, "Hey, where's Billy?" Everyone goes and looks for Billy, and they find him 3 blocks down, playing in the swing of a neighbor, just having a good old time. And when you approach Billy, he's like, "Why are you here?" Okay. So again, it's either the child that becomes anxiously overattached, or it's a child that becomes despondent and just doesn't care what you think because you don't care what he or she thinks. Okay. So again, this is autonomy versus shame and doubt. All right. I have expressed this time and time again, and I hope it's becoming clear that 3 to about 5 and 6, one of the most important things we can do for children is allow them to play. The more playtime, the better they do cognitively, academically, socially, all of those really healthy things. Okay. And like I mentioned before, what type of play are they doing? They're usually doing some type of imitative play. Okay. Where, they're playing house, they're playing firefighter, they're doing all those things and trying to find what they are about, who they are about, what things can they take from the things they see in their world and apply to themselves. And again, if nothing changes in the child's environment, we got to mention that having trust and autonomy sets the child up for initiative if the parents continue this relationship or that secure person is there. And if the child remains in a chaotic, um, unpredictable environment, it sets the child up for what is known as guilt. Okay. So, what is initiative? Initiative is the child, because about this time, children are going into childcare, preschool, kindergarten. And so they're starting to interact more with their peers. They're starting to interact more with their siblings. And this is the child that says, hey, let's go do this. Let's go play. This is a child who it's easy to make friends of. They walk into the child care, they scan the area, they figure out who they want to play with, and they go and they start talking to them. Okay. And that's very healthy initiative. That's someone that's like a parent who has a gold star and a child who has a perfect temperament, what I think. Um, but that's initiative. That's what pure initiative would look like. Okay. Why are they able to do this? Because they feel secure and have learned how to develop trusting relationships. They've learned autonomy and that they can do things on their own. And so now they want to continue this exploration through play. Okay. On this other end, they already have shame and doubt about what they do. And now through play, they're going to learn the issue of guilt. Okay. The difference between shame and guilt is shame is no matter what I do, I feel bad for doing it because I don't know if it was right or wrong. Guilt is the feeling that I should have not done that, even though it was a good thing. Guilt is that persecution we give to ourselves when we think we did something wrong, even when that something could have been right. All right. And the child in stage three follows the same trajectory as a child in stage two. They tend to be one either over clingy to what they consider their secure base, or they're the child that just doesn't want to have anything to do with anyone. Okay. All right. All right. So going along this trajectory, if we have trust, autonomy, and initiative, that means we have some pretty dang good relationships and some pretty good feedback on what we do. Okay. And so it sets us up to start exploring not only what is valuable for me, what is valuable for you, right? And so this is where a child can develop either industry or what Erickson referred to on the opposite end of the scale, inferiority. Okay. So what is industry? And I'm going to put it in simple terms. Industry is, let's say, little Billy is learning how to strum a guitar. Okay. And so at home, he practices a guitar, and mom and dad say, ah, you're going to be a rock star someday, Billy. You're doing really good. And his siblings will sit there and play with him and, jam with him, as you would say. Okay. And then little Billy goes, wow, man, my family likes it. I wonder if my friends at school will. So he'll take his guitar to school and he'll strum on his guitar, and his friends go, wow, Billy, you're awesome. We're going to do a band someday, and you're going to be the lead guitar. Okay. What is Billy learning in this? He's learning that something that brings him pleasure, playing the guitar, also brings other people pleasure. It brings other people purpose. So he's learning what Erickson termed industry, that there's a value in what I do for other people as well as myself. Okay. So what's more likely Billy going to do? Well, probably, hopefully, he'll continue to play the guitar, right? Maybe do a band someday. Maybe just do it for his family. But he's learned that that skill has value for other people. Let's talk about the other side of the scale, though. So Billy's at home, he strums his guitar, and his dad walks in and goes something like, Billy, I told you not to practice that damn thing when I'm home. You should only do that when I'm at work. Could you please do that? Respect me. Okay, maybe something down that line. So he's like, well, family doesn't like it that much. I wonder if my friends will. So Billy takes his guitar to school and strums on it, and his friends go, you know what, Billy, you better start doing better in math and writing because this isn't working. And they probably do it much meaner. I remember kids during that age, they weren't that nice, but maybe, and that's the message he's receiving. On this other extreme end, what is he learning? He's learning inferiority. He's learning what I do does not have value. That even if it brings me pleasure, it means nothing to everyone else. And so it sets up this notion of inferiority towards others. Okay. Um, and and I do just want to mention really briefly that this I actually developed into one of our first models of bullying. It's not 110% accurate. It's not even 100% accurate, but I do want to kind of note what the theory was based on Erickson's developmental phase of inferiority. What developed out of this is theorists thought that bullying came out of inferiority, and so did being a victim of bullying. Okay. What the idea was at the time is that the child felt inferior, so he or she found someone that they could beat down to make themselves feel better than who they were or their situation. So it was finding that other child and calling them names and calling them all kinds of things in order to get them to be even less than them are. It made them feel powerful. Okay. This then actually translated into one of the first theories of domestic violence. In relationship violence and domestic violence, one of the early models was that an abuser is an abuser because they have low self-esteem. They don't think well about themselves, so they beat their spouse down in order for them to feel better about themselves. I will tell you that theory is not accurate, and it's been updated and it's not true. So don't feel sorry for those jerks. Um, but back to children and bullying and victims. It was believed at the time that the only potential victim of bullying can be another child that is also inferior. It has inferiority because the children who have industry are children who are confident in themselves, who set boundaries, who do all these things. So they were not the children that bullies went after. They went after all the other quote unquote weak children. And then this turned into one of the first interventions in bullying about boosting bullies and victims' self-esteem and self-esteem theories about making the bully and the victim feel better about themselves and those kinds of things. I bring these up because some of these ideas are still popular in popular culture. They have been largely debunked. We actually find there can be a lot of industrious children that are just as much as bullies as children who have inferiority issues, and victims are not necessarily in the inferiority category. as well. And so, as we get to this age between especially 5 and 12, we'll get into more research on this and really look at what are the dynamics of bullying behavior, how is it created, and what are some more of the more modern research on it. But I wanted to bring this up at this point because this has tended to become a popular cultural reason behind bullying and bullying behavior. So just wanted to bring that into light. Um, so now let's go into adolescence, that fun stage of development. Um, so adolescence, what we're going to define adolescence is the years we go through puberty up until adulthood, okay, into adulthood. So I kind of want to define these for us because I don't think we've done that so far in this class. What is the line between being an adult versus an adolescent versus a child? Okay. Well, adolescence is pretty it's almost cut and dry, but it's really not. Because what we're going to learn is puberty is not one thing, you've gone through it, you've done it, and there you go. It is actually a multi-year process. Puberty is actually about a 3, 4 year process. It's not just a one thing and done. But how do we mark issues of puberty? Well, this is when girls start their first menstrual process, and boys start to release semen that then can impregnate. Okay, and those are usually the marks of puberty, but it does go beyond that, and it started way before that. And then adulthood, we kind of measure more on either a sociological level or a psychological level or both. Sociological, it's is the person able to take care of themselves, pay for their housing, pay for dependents, hold a job, go to school, do all of those things that develop the person towards independence. Okay, on a sociological level. On a psychological level, it's best described as this kind of analogy. Okay. On a psychological level, it's let's say we have $50 in our checking account, and we're at a store on Friday. We have a power bill due on Monday, and we don't get paid till the following Friday. Okay. But we're at a store, and there is a shirt for $50 that we absolutely love. And maybe it's on sale. And we're like, oh, I want that shirt. But our power bill on Monday is also $50. And that's all the money we have. So, psychological maturity is this. Psychological maturity would be withholding needing to buy that shirt now and paying the power bill on Monday. Okay. Psychological immaturity would be buy the shirt now and I'll figure out the power bill later. Okay. That's kind of the difference is being able to withhold wanting and needing kind of that instant gratification thing because you have responsibilities that weigh more than that want or need at that moment. Okay. That is psychological maturation. And I should note before we get back to Erickson's model that at Erickson's time, these were about the average age of adolescence. That back in that time, if we were taking this class about 30, 40 years ago, we would say that most individuals go through that period that marks going from childhood to adolescence at around the age of 12. And most individuals at this time or before that time could do the sociological and psychological aspects of adulthood. Okay. I should note, because this gets into the conversation and complicates a lot of things that we talk about in this class with these set age groups, I would say here in the United States that the age of puberty is getting younger and younger, and the age of maturation is getting older and older. Okay. And so I'm going to speak about averages. This is not everyone, because I know I have a lot of students that are much younger, that are completely mature. So I'm talking about averages, okay, when I talk about this, because I don't want to insult anyone. Um, when we talk about maturation, the average age today has gone from 18 to 26, okay? Um, and there is a gender difference in this, and it's an important gender difference that we'll get to later in the course. Because the average is 26, but the average for males is 34, and the average for females is 21, which then averages out to 26. So there's developed in our culture for some reason not only an increase in the age of maturation, but a spread based on gender. Okay. So we'll talk more of that when we get to the point where we transition later in the course between adolescence into young adulthood and middle adulthood. And we'll talk about that as we get to that. When we about puberty, the average age is around 10 years of age now, between 10 and 11, depending on what research you read. So it's going down, but we're seeing it even younger and younger. The distribution is getting what we call skewed. I believe the youngest girl to have her first menstruation was 5. It was somewhere between 4.5, 5 years old. When I worked with children who were sexually abused, the youngest sexually abused pregnant child I worked with was 8. She was impregnated at 8 and delivered her first child at the age of 9. So the we see this progression of younger and younger individuals going through puberty. Same with boys, we see them as well. So this is not a gender specific thing. Um, so when we, again, later in the course, when we were into these topics in more detail, we'll need to have a discussion of why we think people are physically maturating at a younger age, but psychologically and socially maturating at older ages. So, and we'll have that conversation when we get to that point. But I just wanted to confuse these age groups that Erickson presented right now, because they're a little off in modern times. But let's go with this as it is. What Erickson believed is that this is the time period that children best develop what's called identity versus role confusion. Because what is the child doing at this time? Well, because they went through a physical change, they've developed their secondary sex characteristics. They have a different voice tone. They have all of these other things. They start to recognize that they physically changed from their childhood body. Um, and this physical change then starts to make them wonder about, well, who are they really as an individual? Who am I? Who am I now? And they start to change the focus in their wordings, even with people. Okay. If you talk to a kiddo that has not gone through puberty versus a kiddo that has, and you ask them, who are you? Most kids who have not gone through puberty will go and say, I'm John and Jill's son. My family is this. I'm Tim's brother. I'm Ann's sister. They'll define themselves. Yeah, they'll say, oh, I like to play, and then they'll say, I like to play soccer. I like to play games. But who they are usually is tied to their family. Okay. But when you ask someone who is in their adolescence, who are you? They'll usually say, well, I'm a really good soccer player. I do good at writing. Um, um, I'm awesome at gaming. They'll say things that they are good at, and not necessarily say, "Well, I'm part of this family system." So they're trying to figure out who they are as an individual. So for Erickson, this sets up a child to really develop a sense of identity versus role confusion. Okay. So, what we would consider a healthy identity? And for this, we're going to go to the concept known as the self concept, which was originally proposed by William James, who is known as the father of American psychology. And he coined two terms that has stuck in psychology for a long time. The first term is self concept, and I'm just going to put this as an SC. The self concept is everything that you can say is you. It's everything you are as a human being living in the world. That's the self concept. He then coined the term self esteem, which I'll put with an SE on the thing. See, I can animate very poorly. Self-esteem originally, according to William James, was your liking or disliking of your self-concept. Do you like who you are? Or are you kind of like, well, I'm okay? Or, geez, I suck. Okay. And that was really the first notion of what self-esteem is. Okay. He divided the self-concept, if we put it into a circle, into two parts. The first part is the social self, or what we modernly say is your social identity. Okay. What is the social self, according to James and according to modern psychology? Your social self is everything that is you, that is given to you by existing in a social context in a social world. So, what are some social identities? Your gender, your race, your age, um, whether you're a brother or a sister, uncle or an aunt, mother or father, student, teacher, employee, not employee, all of those things that are granted to you by being in the social world is your social identity. Okay. And then he termed a term, he actually called it the spiritual self. But in modern terms, we call it the personal self or your personal identity. Okay. So I'm sitting here in the classroom, and let's say we had another student in here. Okay. And they're in Zoom. Let's say you were sitting right by the Zoom person that you were sitting by here. So the two individuals both would have the same social identity at the moment of student, right? So but what would set you apart from the identity of the student sitting next to you is what your personal identity is, okay? Or what he noted as your spiritual self. That it is the spiritual self or the personal self is that those unique qualities that set you aside from the person sitting next to you that has the same identity in this context. Okay. So what makes you unique compared to the person you're, so there's your personality, temperament, your emotional way of dealing with the world, your way of communicating. All of those are unique to you. Okay. So this is the self concept, which then makes up your complete identity. Okay. So based on this, though, what other than having a healthy self-esteem, what is a healthy identity? Well, we're going to draw another. imaginary circle that looks more like a rock. And we're going to say that a healthy identity is actually having multiple identities. And I know that sounds strange because of multi-personality disorder, but stick with me on this. All right. So let's take this individual and we'll put them in a pie right here. And let's say, let's call her Annie. And Annie is really good at soccer. Annie is a prizes herself as a good sister, which I'll put as SI. Let's say Annie does really good at math. I don't know. And let's say Annie identity very much as a girlfriend. Um, and then let's see. And then we'll just put two more X's right here for some other qualities or identities that Annie has. Okay. So why would this be considered a healthy identity? Well, in this case, in this case, let's say that Annie's boyfriend breaks up with her, which is going to break what? The girlfriend identity. Okay. But what does Annie have that can save her self-concept, that could save her self-esteem? Well, Annie is capable of saying, well, okay, while I work on that, this sucks, it hurts, it's painful, but I'm still good at math. I'm still a great sister. I'm still great at soccer. And I'm still great at XX, the other two X's. And I can focus on those and I can build those while I work on this girlfriend identity. Okay. So the idea is that you understand that as a human, you're multifaceted. You have lots of qualities, lots of identities, and they're all important. And you all provide them with focus and purpose. Okay. That's a healthy identity. What's an unhealthy, or what Erickson referred to as role confusion? Role confusion looks something like this. Um, it is a person who has invested their entire life in one single identity. Okay. And my best example of this is when I ran a behavioral health unit for a college in the western side of Arizona who had a football team. Okay. And the coaches for this football team had a unique recruitment process. Is they would go to like these tier one, tier two universities that have excellent football programs, and they would recruit really excellent football players that were kicked out of that university for academic or behavioral reasons. Okay, so they're getting a really good football player in exchange for some not so good sometimes qualities. But what these individuals did come to this college with is the notion that this is my last chance to either make it back into a tier one to two university football program or to the NFL. This is it. This is my last chance. And I can't even remember. I don't know if they've adjusted the seasons or not, but I always remember that when NFL recruitment time came around and they did that thing they do on TV now where they announce all the new players and stuff, or when the universities went and did their recruitment and then announced theirs, I always had to put time on my schedule because I knew that I would need to open it up for some athletes because what would happen is they would start to do excessive drinking. This is when usually violence would occur. High risk behaviors would start to occur. They'd stop showing up to classes. They'd stop showing up to even if they even had any athlete stuff. They would, suicidal attempts were very common. And so, of course, they were sent to my office and we had to figure out what was going on. And this is basically what they said. They, and usually their family, spent their whole life investing in that individual to become a football player. That was their destiny. That's who they are. That's what they've invested their complete identity into, and now it's gone. And they didn't know who they are. They were mad at the world. They were mad at themselves. They were so angry because they no longer have an identity. Okay. And so that started the self-destructive cycle, kind of like a midlife crisis, but at a younger age. Yeah. Yeah. And that's the issue of investing in one identity. Um, and is there will always be disappointment. Okay. The other type of role confusion is when you go to an individual and you say, "Who are you?" And they go, "Oh, I don't even know the nomenclature for people anymore. I'm not a stoner. I'm not a jock. I'm not a academic. I'm not a athlete. I'm not this." And they tell you everything that they're not. But then you challenge them again and said, "Okay, that's not what you're not, but who are you?" And they go and they say, "Well, I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm not them, I'm not there, I'm not this, him, or whatever." Okay. Who is this individual? They know exactly what they're not, but they don't know who they are as an individual. And what we find is these are the individuals that then start to roll into adulthood, that go to a job and think, the manager's an idiot, the processes in the company suck. They don't know how to run this place. That kind of attitude. It's the individual who ends up going from job to job to job because they didn't like this or they didn't like that. They have difficulties in school. They become very close-minded in a personality thing because they're not anything, but they're not that. They have issues in relationships. Um, and this is because they haven't completely developed anything that they are. They just don't, they just, the only thing they know is who they're not. These are individuals who are susceptible to extremist beliefs, cult behavior, those kinds of things. So these are what we consider what would be in terms of adolescence role confusion. Either this I'm this single thing or I'm nothing, but I don't know really what I am outside of that. Okay? All right. Let's try to get through the rest of this. So, we're going into young adulthood and in this age group from 18 to 25. And usually when I ask this question, what are 18 to 25-year-olds really doing or 30-year-olds really doing? I always hear, oh, trying to get a job, trying to work, trying to pay rent, trying to do da 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 da. And then I go, no, you're not. Because on average, again, there are people who don't fit this. I know. On average, males think about it every 90 minutes, and women think about it every 3 to 4 hours, and that is human intimacy in all of its versions. Okay, it's either subconsciously on our mind, or we're consciously thinking about it and imagining about it, and all those kinds of things. And so this led Erickson to believe that the whole purpose of this young adulthood is intimacy versus what he termed as isolation. That what we're really looking for is that someone to develop a family with, to be that kind of person that walks beside me, okay, or with me, okay. So he believed that this is a perfect time to develop intimacy versus isolation, okay. On the intimate end, if you can imagine a person who has developed trust and autonomy, has initiative, is industrious, and has a good identity for themselves, that sets them well up to be able to enter into a relationship with healthy boundaries, with knowing what they want, be encouraging to their partner for what they want. And so that sets them up for what we would consider healthy intimacy. Okay. Um, on the other end, there's isolation. Okay. And if you can imagine, if we go down the dark side of this list, if you don't trust anybody, you constantly have shame, doubt, and guilt. You don't feel quite measured up to everyone else, and you really don't know who you are. This is going to set you up for what Erickson termed as isolation. Okay. But when we talk about isolation, this doesn't necessarily mean they don't have friends, they're not social, they're not extroverts, they're not that or this. It means it's more of a psychological isolation. And there's two versions of this as well. On one end, it is a person who invests all of their energy into non-human things, into non-human relationships. And what I mean by that is intimate relationships. So this is the workaholic. This is the guy who has the coolest sports car but never dates. This is the stereotypical dog man, cat woman. Um, and in this, what the person is doing is they're projecting their intimate needs on something that is not a human intimate potential. Okay. Um, and again, when we get to this, there's some caveats to this that we need to talk about later in the course, but that's kind of what Erickson argued about. The other kind of isolation is a person who really does want an intimate relationship. They really do want to be close to someone, okay? And so they get into a relationship and it's wonderful. It starts off really, really great. Everything's going well. Oh, I'm in love. Everything's going awesome. And then in about the third to sixth month, they kind of question things. They start to question things. And then by about the sixth month, they're already flirting with other people, or they just dump the person and then start to look for someone else. But by about the sixth month, um, uh, they're done. They put up what people call walls. Okay. Well, what happens in this? In most beginning relationships, we don't always present who we really are. We present the best of who we are. Okay. So you go over to their apartment, for example, and their dishes are done, the bed is made, the floor is clean. And for about the first 2, 3 months, you consistently go over and it looks like that. Their hair is done, they're wearing clothes and all those kinds of things. But what happens around the 2, 3 months? You go over and you notice dishes are not always done. The bed's not always made. Oh, we're wearing pajamas tonight. You're sitting together and one of you lifts up a cheek and lets out some gas. You drink a soda and you hear a belch. What happens is humans are not good at keeping in who they truly are. And so around the 2, 3 month mark, the rest of us start to come out. Okay. And we start, and what does that do to a person who has an isolation mindset? That's scary because that's reality. The relationship is now coming real. And then around the next 4 to 6 months, you notice that there's an extra key on your chain. You notice there's two toothbrushes in your bathroom. You notice that when you go grocery shopping, you're kind of ordering stuff for other people too. And now what's this becoming? This is becoming a commitment, which if you think about people on this right side of this table, that's scary. That's frightening. And because of that, they have to escape. So either they start flirting with other people and start to develop more intimate relationships with others, or which, if you want to call this cheating, or they knock off that person right away and get out of there and then start another relationship. So this is a person that tends to be in and out of relationships constantly, and that's their form of isolation. So those are the forms of isolation. What I do want to say at this point, because it's important to state, if you find yourself more on these right side, a lot of people always ask me, well, can I change these even when I'm adult? Can I go back and instead of having this isolationist, can I develop intimate relationships? Can I form identity? The answer is yes, absolutely. I want to make that very clear. It'll be more work, but it's doable. So please don't think if this has that you've been more on the right side during this lecture, you're stuck. You're not. It's there's more to the story, and we're able to change. Okay. But let me finish up middle adult and late adulthood so that we can start with infancy next Tuesday. So, into middle adult, what Erickson believed is we went through something he coined generivity versus stagnation. Okay. Somewhere in middle adulthood, 40, 45, maybe 50, a person does some type of evaluation of their life. And I'd argue we constantly do this, but during this time of period, it becomes really important because usually by this time we've established career, family, usually some type of partnership with someone, those kinds of things. And we do this evaluation of life and we go back and on the generivity end, I'll say, this is the person who, and I wish life would be perfect like this, but this is a person who looks back and goes, I'm still in love with my first love, and we've been married for 20 years, and everything is good. My son is graduating high school, maybe. My daughter is doing excellent in college. And I've maintained a good career. I did good in college. I got a career, and life is good and life is meaningful. And in Erickson's term, this is where a person experiences generivity, because what they do is because life was good to them, they feel like they need to give back to life. And so this is where a lot of individuals start to enter public life. So this is where they start volunteering at their church. They start going to city council meetings. They start volunteering at the food bank. They start kind of doing more community-based things and giving back to the community. Okay. So that is what he termed generivity. On stagnation, the person looks back and they go, I'm on my third wife, third divorce already. My daughter's in jail. My son is barely making it. I'm on my eighth job. Don't I think I'm about to be fired. Um, my rent's 2 months past due. Life has been crappy to me. And because of that, I'm not doing anything. So I stagnate. I get frozen and I get stuck. Okay. So there's two versions of this, of course. On the one end, it's kind of like that midlife crisis thing. It's where that 50-year-old, let's use 50, that 50-year-old uh, thinks back and goes, "What did I miss in my past that isn't giving me what I have today?" So the man might go and buy, a really nice hot rod and start dating girls in their 20s, okay? Because maybe that's what they feel they missed is that adventure of youth. I don't know. This is where a woman will go back and do some breast augmentation, some facelifts, and maybe even look at younger men. And because what's she doing? She's going back and again doing just like the man did. What in life experiences did I not have that that brought me to the point I'm at? And so these are the individuals, and I will say in the negative end of this, this usually never ends up well for these individuals. Research on individuals like this show that they end up usually bankrupt, without a family, without anything, because doing that is just well, it's childish in a lot of ways. Um, According to Erickson's and his research. I'm not calling anyone childish, sorry. Um, and so, what about the other part of isolation? Well, these are individuals who then take that as relevant information. And we do see this in research with individuals that are between the age of about 35 and 45. And I think I mentioned this in the first class, is this tends to be a period where people kind of get to this stagnating moment and they realize that they need to make change. So, on the positive end of stagnation, these are the individuals who, in their midlife, go back to school, try to find a new occupation. Yeah, they're likely to get divorced, but they try to find healthier relationships or healthier people to be around. They start to socialize more. So that's maybe a positive end of stagnation for some. Um, and hopefully that's kind of what it produces in the end. But there is a group of stagnants that just kind of maintain that through the remainder of their life, unfortunately. Okay. All right. So now let's go into late adulthood. And again, we're taking these trajectories as binary, nothing changes. And so keep that in mind. So we get into a late adulthood, and the thing that we learn that we didn't know when we were young is life does end. Okay, when we're young, we don't often think that, oh, I'm going to die someday, so I'm going to go party, have fun. And once we do start aging, we're like, no, I want to maintain my youth. I'm never going to die, so we go and do all kinds of things to maintain it. But at some point in our life, we come to realize that life does end. Usually, this is in older adulthood when we've lost our parents, we've lost our siblings, we've lost close friends, hopefully to natural reasons, but pretty much we're losing everyone around us that has been there through our whole life. And we go, oh my gosh, life does end, and my life is going to end someday. And they also realize the notion of immortality and how it can exist, um, 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 not by supernatural means, I think I would say. What does immortality mean? Well, immortality in human terms means that I'm remembered after I'm dead. Not that I'm physically immortal, that people remember me after I'm dead. So, what are some people other than Jesus Christ that a lot of people think are immortal? Well, people like George Washington, Martin Luther King. They're immortal because we remember them and that we keep them in our collective conscious, whether for good or bad. Okay. And so, I don't know, other people, Da Vinci, maybe, all of those individuals that we continue to keep remembered, at least in our collective consciousness. Okay. And so this is a person who, again, looks back and goes, will I be remembered after I'm dead? And so for the person who dies with ego integrity, according to Erickson, this is a person who says, my family continues to come and love and visit me. They call me all the time. I still connect with my work friends. I still have community. I did this really cool thing in my work life that they've continued on. I got an award for something or some things. And I know after I'm gone, people will remember me. So I can die with integrity. And so this is the person who is that person who lives on, very happy, dies happy, all of those cool things that we all hope for. On the despair end, this again goes back to that person that was stagnated. It goes back to an individual who their family doesn't visit them anymore. They don't even call. I'm lucky to get a Christmas card from them. I really just have SSI because I never really did much with my work life. I'm not married. They left, they're gone. There's none of that. And I realize that when I die, I die. I'm not going to be remembered. And so, if you want to think about the person in despair, this is a person that shows up to the um, um, nursing home, sits on the front porch, and waits for death. This is a person who will most likely catch a chronic disease of some type that will end their life with more suffering and earlier. Now, to this end, I will say when we get to older adulthood, that yes, people who maintain connection with their work life, maintain social connections with their world and friends and family, and have a healthy family place into older life, they do live longer and healthier. And those people who don't maintain connection with who they were and their work identity and don't maintain connection with family and friends, they do die earlier. So there is something to this integrity versus despair. Okay. We are over time. I apologize. So if you have questions, please write them down.